Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Local Talent Showcase. My name is Tony Frontino. I am your host and producer of Local Talent Showcase. Now, Local Talent Showcase, I try to bring to you entertainment, unique occupation, and information that sometimes you don't get on the local news. You have to listen to me. A couple of weeks ago, I did a show on nuclear power, and I had two extremely interesting persons on my show. They were so interested that they came back. So let's start with Tom. Tom, would you introduce yourself? Give me a little background for people that didn't see the first show.
Sure. My name is Tom Tamarkin, and I'm the founder and president of a company in Sacramento called USCL Corporation. And part of my background, going back to the early 1970s, is that I did a lot of work with electrical power meters based on the theory that the power in the home is used by the people, and the people should therefore have the information related to their power usage inside their home as a management tool.
And we're gonna...
Of course, in the early 1970s, at least in Arizona, power cost about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So at that time, nobody was interested. Then, in the mid-1980s, I became involved with the company as chief operating officer called Datamatic in Dallas, Texas. And part of what Datamatic did is we converted a large number, a very, very large number of utilities in the United States who were reading the power meters by sending a man out to each and every home once a month with a pencil and a piece of paper. And we converted that system to account management or route software and handheld data terminals. And within about 3 or 4 years, our company and one competitor converted every investor-owned utility in the United States. We got them off cards and on to advanced electronic meter systems. And then in the early 1990s, we actually invented something which popularly today is called the smart meter.
And we're going to get into that
exactly
a little later. Yes. Cheryl.
All right, so my background is I'm the owner and founder of Rosewood Environmental Engineering, and I come out of the nuclear power field, and which is what got me into first nuclear waste cleanup and then hazardous waste cleanup and then the overall environmental field and energy, different energy and issues. And it's part of how I met Tom. Through it. I was in the nuclear industry when Chernobyl happened. And then my other interest in this is that I'm also a volunteer director of the Advocacy for Jobs Affected by Regulation, which is a volunteer organization, and it's part of the Center for Environment, Commerce, and Energy in Washington, D.C. So
now, is that organization trying to make it easier to get employment?
Yeah, it's
past the regulations.
Right. Well, it's mostly a public awareness 501c3 organization, and of course we're always looking for donations, but but mainly it's to keep people aware of how much regulations are affecting our economy and our ability to create jobs and how jobs are being stifled.
Especially in California.
And especially in California. Right.
It'd be amazing to see how much money they spend on regulations.
Exactly.
Yes. Now, one of the interesting things in the news is that the government is spying on us. And I even heard that they're saying your cable box, they're going to put cameras in your cable box and a mic, and they're going to listen to what you're watching in your living room, what movies you're watching, what you're doing with your husband, etc., etc. Yeah. Tom, are we being spied on, and is your meter going to do that?
Well, I think, firstly, perhaps we should take a step backwards and talk a little bit about just what it is we're doing and why we're doing it.
Go ahead.
And then we can lead into this issue, which is an important issue you brought up.
Right. You had a original vision for the smart meter, and so why don't you talk a little bit about what it was you intended it to do and what is it actually doing now, right?
As I mentioned in 1990, 1992, in fact, there was an article that you found this morning in the Public Power magazine that talked about this technology we developed. So this goes back 20-some years. I think because of your consulting engineering background, you understand that utilities are a regulated entity, and therefore they move with the speed of a glacier, sometimes going uphill. In other words, utilities just don't move at all unless the regulatory bodies instruct them to move.
And unless they are very incentivized to do it.
Exactly, of course. So the fact of the matter is we developed technology many years ago, and over the course of the last 20 years, the technology has become more and more mature and much less expensive to manufacture, but the utilities just have not seen the need to adapt it. However, having said that, in California, in 2001, we became the laughingstock of the nation.
Why?
Right.
Because Dan Rather on CBS News said California is the laughingstock of the nation.
Oh, okay.
Why? Because we were having brownouts and blackouts in the winter. In the winter, not in the summer.
Not in the summer.
Not in the summer when the air conditioning is on, but in the winter. And in fact, not only were we on the CBS Evening News and the NBC Evening News, but we made the cover of Time magazine. And the cover of Time magazine had an article with a plug strip in the shape of California. And then below that it says California Unplugged.
We were getting there.
Yes.
Why were we having blackouts and brownouts in the winter?
Distribution. It was mostly distribution.
Well, I kind of asked myself that question. And within 3 months, I dusted off, if you will, the technology that I had developed many years before and said, well, we have, to a great extent, the solution to this dilemma that California finds itself in. And within about a 3-month period, January, February, March, April, our company actually developed and prototyped an in-home display and a home area network to bring the meter inside the home so that the homeowner could take charge of the amount of energy he's using at times of what we call a critical peak demand situation.
And we do have some pictures of your...
And we held an open house here in Sacramento, and we invited all of the politicians, the Assembly, the Senate, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and in fact, a senator from Antioch named Tom Torlakson attended. And Tom Torlakson, who had a background in physics and he actually taught school, became very intrigued with the technology, and he said, "Can you do this at a low price?" And I said, "It's a function of volume. What are you talking about?" "Well, how about 13 million meters in California?" Well, for 13 million meters in California, the technology becomes what we call consumer electronics technology, which is very low in price. And with that, Tom Torlakson wrote a bill, which was signed by Governor Gray Davis, Senate Bill 1976, which caused the California Energy Commission to work with the Public Utility Commission for about 2 years with a large number of consultants, and they proved up what we already knew. If you give consumers tools to help conserve, and you make the tools simple to use, the consumers will probably use it.
Right.
What is...
And they see a benefit in it for themselves. So they can actually see, like looking at a gas pump, you know, with the numbers spending, they can actually see how much, you know, money they're spending, whether they're a high rate period or a lower rate period. And
so at the end of the study with the California Energy Commission and the CPUC, the CPUC mandated the 3 major electrical utilities in California, San Diego Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric, collectively replace about 13 million of these power meters with new communicating electronic power meters. And our company we actually forced the state to adopt a new set of standards and specifications to ensure that there was a widget inside that meter, we called it a universal interface adapter, that would allow every power meter to communicate with something inside the home that you could buy at Lowe's or Home Depot.
So in other words, you can connect this to your home computer?
Would that be connect to an in-home display, to your computer, your laptop, your iPhone, smartphone, any device which has what we call RF connectivity and operates over standard
Now, what
computer
will
protocols.
this meter tell the consumer?
Well, let's look at one.
Go ahead.
Effectively, what we are doing is we are taking the power meter, which nobody knows where it's located, but believe me, every house in America has one of these power meters, and it's located outside the house in a metal box.
Yeah.
And with a series of radio transmitters, we transmit some of the data from this meter to the utility, which you're going to ask me about in a minute or two, because that can create conditions
so the
of
utility will
concern
be
for
getting
spying
some of this info too.
to bill you at the end of the month.
Right.
Oh, yeah, well.
Yeah, and in that way, they automate the billing. And as I said a few minutes ago, in the old days, we converted from paper and pencils
Yeah,
to
right,
handheld
to-
terminal. Now we're converting from the handheld terminal to automatic transfer of
So your
data.
meter man doesn't have to come out to read the meter.
He no longer has to open the gate, go in your backyard, and inadvertently let the dog out that gets hit,
And,
hit by the
thieves
car.
can no longer claim that they're the meter reader.
Right,
Came to your
right.
house, right?
Exactly. So what I have here is a sample of our product, if we can see it. And you can tell, looking at the product, how much I'm paying for power, the price of power per kilowatt hour.
We can
And you
zoom
can
in on
tell how much power I'm using based on this demo device at this point in time. So effectively, what I'm saying is that I have the, as you said, the gasoline fuel pump gauge in my house, and I have the car odometer in my house, and I have the calculator that divides mileage by gallons and gives me what amount of energy I'm using per second,
And
per
there's
minute,
different
or
rates
per
for
hour.
different times of day, and it'll switch that automatically?
Well, absolutely, because now utilities have a need to implement what we call time of use rates. The reason for that, it's not a bad thing. The reason for time of use rates relates to the fact that the price to generate electricity is a function of the time that it's generated based on the demand.
Demand at the time.
So as demand goes up, price goes up.
Right.
And if you do research and you go to California Public Utility Commission and, and actually look at the background of time of use rates, you see that the cost to produce electricity, what we call its base system cost, can vary by 100 to 1.
Wow.
100 to 1 on the wholesale market.
If I'm a consumer, I have this in my house, what can I control?
Anything.
What can I do?
Anything that has a chip in it to be controlled by.
Well, that's a very good question, because many people don't necessarily want their dishwasher and their stove and their dryer to be connected automatically, but
Thermostat,
rather
yeah.
they simply want something in the home to tell them what the dryer's taking and what the washing machine's taking, and then they can make the decision.
So let's say
To-
I'm going to do my laundry. I turn on my washer. I can check this to see how much higher
how
my
faster it's- how much
my
faster it's
fast
going.
electricity, and I can
And-
calculate how much this is going to cost.
And not
me.
only that,
It'll show you.
it's showing you in
show
real
you?
time
And
how
it'll show
much
you
it's costing.
cumulative, too.
Fantastic.
And as importantly, it will tell you if perhaps it would be a wise financial decision to operate your dryer and your dishwasher in 3 hours, because it's going to be a third of the price after 10 o'clock at
Oh,
night.
so it's going to say if you wait till 10 o'clock, you're going to save X amount.
Exactly.
Now, why are people against this? Why are there so many negative stories?
One of the primary concerns is the privacy issue, because Tom's intention was to have this be a consumer-based data collection that the consumer alone really uses, and the only thing that the utility gets was the gross amount of money of electricity usage, per month. But what actually happened?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Why are we so...
That's not what happened. It wasn't a personal consumer-based data. It became a utility. Basically, what does
Well-
the utility do with all that information?
Hire a contractor to manage it and interpret it, which we call meter data management companies,
And-
who in fact have what we call data warehouses.
Which is what I call big data.
Big data.
So
Like you have
the-
big oil, you have big data.
So somewhere in this state, that's saving all this information on what I'm turning my TV on and when I'm using my washer? Is that true?
No, not exactly, but some people believe that might be true. But what in fact can happen is that somewhere in this country, or perhaps even in India or China or some foreign country, there are large facilities who contract with local utilities to receive this data from each and every meter within the utility service territory, and then manage that data, archive that data, interpret that data, and prepare that data for the utility for purposes of billing at the end of the month, as well as perhaps allowing the customer to have access to that data on the internet a day later.
But also, are they collecting that data and then in order to collate it and sell it?
Well, there are two issues there. Virtually every state in the United States has utility commissions, or corporation commissions in the case of Arizona, who require this data to be archived and maintained in the event of a billing dispute. So there's a requirement to preserve and archive the data.
So who is big data besides the IRS and the NSA?
Right.
Yeah.
Who else is watching
is
me?
Big data. Who are the companies that are big data?
Well, the companies in this case who potentially could be big data are those companies that are in, as I said, the meter data management business. And in fact, that sounds almost as if I'm making the term up. But believe me, you can go to Google and you can Google meter data management companies, and you'll see some very well-known names like IBM, Siemens, General Electric, Landis and Gear.
How about Honeywell?
Honeywell is not in the meter data management business per se.
What?
But they are a participant because the thermostat that Honeywell makes is part of the solution.
What are they going to do with this data?
Or what
Charge
can they
the
do?
utility to maintain it and manage it. Because the utility, as I said, a utility traditionally is in the business of generating electrical power and selling that power. And frankly, they want to do just that. They want to generate power, sell power, service power, and keep their customers up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
But data management companies.
Unfortunately, what happened is that our government at the federal level has imposed requirements that we attempt to reduce the peak demand. That is to say, the demand on the system when everything gets turned on at one time when it's 105 degrees outside in the summer.
Right.
And if we can reduce this, what we call critical peak demand, by 2 or 3 or 4%, several things happen. One, we don't have to build new power plants. 2, it creates less wear and tear on the substations and the power lines,
The
distribution system in general. And 3, it greatly reduces the amount of pollution and hydrocarbons that we emit in the air, because as we increase the demand, we have to turn on what are called peaking stations. And these peaking stations typically burn things like diesel.
So
Exactly.
you're saying we're talking about global warming?
So the government has, through their green button energy policy promulgated through the Department of Energy, put a requirement on the utilities to manage critical peak demand. The big, we call them big data, the meter data management companies, their philosophy, and I'm not saying it's an incorrect philosophy, but their philosophy is that the American public is too busy to manage how they spend their money inside their home. Therefore, they have to be paid to get involved to control when you use power inside your house.
Do they benefit in any way of having a more or less unconcerned, low data consumer? I mean, do they benefit by having the consumer just spend all their money and then afterwards telling them how much they spent, or do they, is there any incentive for them? Because it sounds as though the consumer is the one who controls whether they're using their electricity at peak power, and right now we don't get that information, so we can't control it and we can't manage it.
Well, that's exactly what we attempted to do. We attempted to bring the dials of the meter inside the home and convert them from engineering units like kilowatt hour, and nobody knows what that is, to dollars and cents.
Right.
And
that
at the
people
same
can recognize.
exactly, and at the same time we provide real-time cost information, so you know at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock exactly how much you're paying.
But
But
that
let
is
me
what's happening.
ask you, does it mean now, if I turn on my washer at the peak hours, okay, is this going to tell the utility to charge me more because I'm using the electricity at during that peak hour?
Yes and no. And let me try to answer that, because that's the crux of the matter here.
Right.
And let me attempt to answer that without becoming too scientific or too technical.
Good.
Okay?
I'll stop you if you do.
The power meter is like the gas pump at the service station, and you buy gasoline and you have the little gauges that are telling you how many liters or gallons of fuel you have purchased and what your accumulated bill is at that point. But a power meter doesn't measure the volume of a liquid, it measures electron flow. And it does that by measuring voltage and current and doing some mathematical operations.
Which was a little bit of the problem of the mechanical meters.
Okay,
Yeah.
right?
so having said
Right.
that, the power meter really isn't a complex device. It's nothing more than an electrician's voltmeter, an electrician's ammeter, and a calculator and a clock put into one little package.
Okay, we're
Now-
coming up on 5 minutes, and this is so interesting. I'm going to have a second show on this, and we'll continue. And hopefully you will explain the flow chart on how this works into the house, into the utility.
How it's meant to work
Yeah,
and how
how
it's
it
currently.
meant.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and we may need to edit this, but I thought this show was 1 hour, and we haven't been talking here for an hour.
Yeah, we can, if you want, we'll go over an hour. I just
I
need
thought
to.
we were going for an hour on this show, and then we were going to have another
Okay.
hour show about...
Let's continue. That's fine. I'll get you a spot for an hour. Now, explain.
So that means...
Will this save the consumer money? That's what they
So-
want to know.
What I started to explain a minute ago is the fact that we are measuring effectively the amount of electrons or electricity that we are using over a period of time, and we have a clock in the meter that knows what that period of time is, and therefore it can charge accordingly. However, the power meter does not know what specific device inside the home is using the power. It does not know if the dryer is using the power, if the air conditioning is using the power, if the pool pump is using the power, unless, and here's the big
Unless.
unless.
There's always an
Okay,
unless.
there's always an unless. The Department of Energy and a program that we call Energy Star is now requiring all what we call dry goods or manufacturers of appliances like the washing machines
Right,
and the
LG
dishwashers
and all those.
to include a secondary power meter inside them, and to include the ability to transmit data from that secondary power
So
meter.
it has a transmitter.
So my washing machine will now be a transmitter for data.
We call that the smart appliance or the communicating appliance, so that the appliances can talk to each other and talk to something inside the house.
I would love that.
Now, to the extent that we have a number of these smart appliances inside the home,
The newer
if
your
they in
appliance is, the
fact,
more likely it has it. Yeah.
yes, of course.
Right.
If in fact you have a number of these appliances inside the home, then you have the potential, if it's not handled correctly, to take that data, that resolution of A, B, C, D, E device that's using power, and inadvertently get that data to the utility. Okay.
So,
Now, I say we have the potential for that happening, but we also have the ability to keep that from happening, and that's what we really need to talk about.
We have the capability, we don't have the ability because of the law, right?
No. We have the capability to keep that from happening. We don't yet have the ability because of what you call big data. Because
Right.
now the utilities have basically ignored the consumer in this, and they basically ignored the consumer's wanting of this knowledge inside the home in favor of allowing the data management company or the proverbial computer in the sky to run each and every American's home by remote control.
So can the utility, if I have a smart washing machine, can the utility talk to that washing machine to find out how much electricity I'm using to wash my clothes? Can they do that?
Theoretically, yes, but are they going to do
Are
that?
they?
No. Do they care about doing that?
Do
no.
they?
But there are people that are very concerned who have actually formed what we call an anti-smart meter movement, who are terribly concerned that that could happen, especially in the future if the government were to become a bit more tyrannical than.
As I understand it, what's actually happening right now is that we aren't getting that data. The only people who's getting that data right now is the big data management companies.
But the big data management companies today are not getting, they're only getting the gross inside the home because there is no network inside the home that's yet connected to the meter. So that's part of the misnomer that we need to correct.
Right now they can get a hold of your thermostat if you signed up for the
A smart,
thermostat.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, under Title 24 in California, you're required to have a programmable communicating thermostat in all new construction.
Really?
All new construction,
on new
right.
Exactly.
construction.
So
but-
theoretically, they could get the air conditioning data.
Right. So,
No.
and they can't, but so right now, if you have new construction, if you have a new thermostat, then, because they're not making any of the older thermostats that don't have that ability in them. So now if you have a new one, the utility theoretically has the ability to control your thermostat. In the future, if the same sort of transmitter is in other appliances, they can shut your refrigerator off.
Yeah,
They can shut
yeah.
your-
They can turn
know.
my air off.
Right.
Well,
Theoretically.
but again,
So
utility.
that's the big concern, right?
That is the big concern. The fact of the matter is utilities simply do not have the desire, the motivation, or the
But
culture to
that's
control a
the-
person's home. Nor could they conceivably do that because as an example here in Sacramento, SMUD, our local utility, has 600,000 accounts. And to be able to zero in on account A, B, and C and control that would be so resource intensive it would never happen.
But
So this
that
is somewhat
took-
theoretical. The conditions could be there,
Uh-huh.
and that gives rise to the concern from the anti-smart meter folks.
And one of the things they're concerned about is not so much whether the utility is going to turn
It's
it off
big
or
government.
not. It's who is big data
Right,
collecting
right.
the
Okay.
information from,
Right.
Now this is a very valid point, exactly.
Right. Exactly.
So one of the things that our company is advocating, and this is very timely, by the way, because I had a industry trade publication do an interview with me that was published nationwide about 2 or 3 days ago. And what we advocate is that two things. One, we do in fact need to allow communications between the power meter and some device inside the home to where the consumer has this data. The data is the consumer's data, and she needs to have access to the data. However, there also needs to be what I call a firewall. Just as you have Norton in your computer,
Right.
and you have a firewall in your computer, we need to have a home firewall that keeps what's yours,
Right.
that keeps how you use the power inside your home and only allows the minimum amount of data necessary for the utility to generate the bill at the end of the month to
Exactly.
go to the
So in
utility.
California, this is a privacy issue, and it comes
Exactly.
up all the time,
Right.
even with the IRS and everybody else,
Right.
that the U.S. Constitution doesn't have an express right to privacy stated in the Constitution. However, there's some implied right to privacy in different amendments.
But how do you...
But in California here, we have an express right to privacy, and I even wrote it down.
Wow.
They say in our Constitution, and it's actually the second sentence of the Constitution, after they say that we have inalienable rights, they define those as among these are enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, processing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining safety, happiness, and privacy.
Okay.
Now,
That's
how
the
do
new-
you
that's-
define...
So that's based on our
But
Declaration
how
of
do you
Independence.
define privacy? What
That's
is privacy?
So what is privacy? If you own your data, that's privacy. You can't hand it out to anybody, and only government even can't get a hold of it without some kind of a warrant or some
Okay.
sort of a legal legally underlying reason for your individual data. They can't blanketly start
They
collecting
can't
data.
come into your house and
Right.
say, let me see your computer because I want to
So
see
at
that."
least, and certainly not private utilities. The federal government can use their constitutional right under the federal law, but under state law, businesses doing business in California cannot.
Let me ask you this. Is this going to increase the price for our consumer? Do they have to buy this device?
Or the consumers as a whole.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, it should reduce the price that consumers pay for power. And the reason that it should reduce the price, the bill at the end of the month that consumers pay for power, is that it empowers the consumer to use power more prudently and to keep the utility below this peak demand scenario that I suggested a few minutes ago, which reduces what we call basis of cost to generate that power.
You'll start shopping for your
right.
electricity.
Well, that's a deregulation issue. That's a whole other subject.
But I mean,
you'll
you'll be
shop
shopping
for
for
the
the
time
that
time.
you use it. You'll be
Exactly.
shopping for the least cost
Now,
time to
what's
use
the
your
However, the question you're asking is who pays for the
Yeah,
device?
who pays for that?
Now, this particular device that I'm showing you, which is kind of our company's flagship product, we call it the EMS 2020, is an in-home dedicated display. And this does have a cost associated with it. And it's not that expensive to some people. It's very expensive to other people. We know that. But we can also run the same data on your iPhone or your Android phone or your BlackBerry or your laptop.
So
what about your cable television?
Yeah. What about your cable television?
Or
You
your
could
dish?
theoretically run it on your cable television through your set box converter, but the fact of the matter is this gets down to the compatibility of what we call data sharing formats and Wi-Fi and Zigbee and Bluetooth and all these various combinations of
What's the
communication.
timeline? I know they're starting to install these, right? The smart meter.
There are about 28 million smart meters that have been installed nationwide. In fact, it's probably closer to 30 million today. There are another 45 million that are under contract, meaning purchase orders have been let and funds have been committed by the utility companies. The reason that this has happened is that under the ARRA, Economic Recovery Act of our president, and what we call stimulus funds, partly related to the fact that when, in his first term, this president went on his stump speech talking about shovel-ready projects, the very first project that he spoke of, if you recall, was smart meters. Exactly. So about $6 billion of ARRA funds were funneled through the Department of Energy to be used for matching grant funds to the utility companies nationwide. And one of the biggest recipients, by the way, of those funds was Sacramento Municipal Utility District in combination with Rio Americana College and Davis. So every single meter here in Sacramento, 600,000 meters, were in fact replaced about a year ago. Yes.
No,
and paid for with government funds.
What's the timeline on getting this information to the consumer?
Okay, of the 30 million plus the 50 million, so we're now at 80 million meters out of 120 million total in the United States. Most of these new meters have a device inside them that can in fact communicate with the device inside the home.
So when you had a device in the home.
However, it has to be turned on. The device in the meter has to be activated by the utility, which means the utility, just like your cable company, AT&T or Shore West, they have to activate based on registering the electronics in your home, something called a MAC address.
Right, okay.
Okay? So the utility has to go through a procedure and a process with the customer to activate and register the device. It's done remotely. But it's only done if the utility has an interest and an inclination to do it. Utilities, including those in Northern California, including San Diego, and Los Angeles, Southern California Edison, have shown a resistance to do this because of fear of the unknown. They're afraid that if they put too many of these display devices or a home area network in the home and they don't work, they're going to be burdened by complaints. So the utility has naturally been kind of dragging their feet to make this happen.
Have we done a test program?
State of California and our Public Utility Commission has mandated that the 3 investor-owned utilities engage in pilot programs, Southern California Edison being the largest. However, that pilot program is over a 2-year period, and it's a very small number of units. So what our company is doing, and this is very innovative here in Sacramento, we have known, and I have known since 2001, and if not before, that the only way this is going to happen is if we can reach very large numbers of citizens, of people, and get the people to demand their data, to get the people to say, okay, I'm going to make a conscious decision. Big data is okay. I don't care if big data gets my data.
But I want my data.
Or I don't want big data to get my data, but in either event, I want my data. So if you give the consumer the choice, he can allow Siemens or General Electric or IBM to manage his house, and that's just fine. Somebody else may not want that. They may want to take total control. But in either case, the homeowner should know what's going on inside his home. So we work with big data. We don't work at the expense of big data, but we give the consumer the choice to allow big data to run his home or for him to take control of his home. So
you're telling the consumer he or she can decide if they want this working or not?
Exactly. And the way we're doing this is we are reaching out because we find that there's a generational discontinuity here. If you think about it, I've been in the utility industry for 35 years. I started out in the generation side in climbing through things called electrostatic precipitators and scrubbers and getting very dirty in the process. So having been in the utility industry for so many years, we know that the management of utility companies traditionally and classically is extremely conservative and somewhat aged. And we know, as an example, the exact opposite is true in the telecommunications industry. You get the young, bright guys coming out of college running telecommunication companies, whereas the people running the utility companies have been there for many, many years, and they have a mindset, and they don't want to be burdened by the younger generation coming in with new ideas. So what we have to do is we have to generate conditions where we take advantage of the younger generation and get them to serve as the voice and the advocates to rise up to the utility company and say, we really, really want this.
So you're saying the utility company is not looking towards the future?
Utility company's a monopoly, and its only job is to generate power and to make certain that power is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without interruption.
But this is a great gadget.
Yes.
And anybody can buy this for their, for their mother or father.
Exactly.
And it's
but a utility utility companies don't think about gadgets. They think about delivering power.
But right now, let's say in Sacramento, because that's where we are.
Yes.
And we have SMUD. Anybody can buy this gadget.
Exactly.
And
where can you buy this gadget?
And ask SMUD to turn it on for them.
That is the way it should be.
Okay. And is it that way?
That is the way it should be, but again, our strategy is to create the conditions by getting very large numbers of people to call SMUD and to demand this, so that SMUD sees the need that they do this. Because if that doesn't happen, SMUD will do nothing for 2 or 3 years except a very, very small pilot project, which they are currently doing by allowing people who live in the city limits of Sacramento and have a Sacramento library card to go to the library and check one of these devices out for a couple of weeks, take it home and see if they like it, and then SMUD correlates that data, reports it back to the government because they're a municipal utility.
But at the
end of the government's analysis of this whole program, SMUD, in a very bureaucratic way, will then make the decision whether or not to take it to the next step. That could take 2 years.
But can they turn it on?
Yes. We want to short-circuit that process by getting large number of people aware of this and contacting SMUD so that SMUD doesn't have to wait 2 years to learn that it's a
how
good
are you
idea.
But what if a large number of people bought this and then contacted SMUD and just said, turn mine on?
They need to do it, and they probably will do it because a large number of people are contacting SMUD. And
Right.
because SMUD is a municipal utility district, and because they have a board of directors with people like Bill Slayton and others who are elected officials, elected to the board of SMUD, all of those folks are going to do what their constituents want them to do. So if the
let me
people
ask
say
you
turn it
this.
on, they'll turn it on.
Tom, let me ask you this. Number one, can we go out to your local electronics store and buy one of these
You
today?
will be able to very shortly, within 6 months.
And do you have a educational program so you can get this out to the public?
Well, one thing that I should say is that our company was responsible for this technology. We introduced this in 2001. We literally helped the utility company absorb this from a feature and function and standardization viewpoint in 2006, 2007, 2008, and perhaps even more importantly, we have
The patents.
patent
patent.
protection, and our patents basically allow, yes, we have 5 granted patents and 3 pending patents, and our patents put us in the position that we can work with the utility companies and with other manufacturers to ensure the proper level of standardizations of what we call interoperability.
Are there other companies out there that coming up with similar devices like that, maybe tweaking it a little bit and making it a little different?
There are many want-to-be companies that would like to be in this field, but the problem is you have to integrate the home display and the home area network with the wide area network and with the meter and with the data collection software. And that is a non-trivial exercise. It takes hundreds and hundreds of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars of software development in order to actually make it work, virtually by a utility project, because every utility has a different meter and every utility has a different vendor who's providing the wide area network and what we call the meter infrastructure of communications.
Let me ask you this.
We propose to kind of standardize this and to serve as the clearinghouse through a consortium that we built to make this easy for the utilities to absorb.
So let me ask you, Tom, if there's some people out there that are early adopters of gadgets, like they want to be the first on the block to own something, right? Can they invest in your company and be in line to be one of the first people to get one of these gadgets?
Yes, and one of the things that we're doing in order to reach very large numbers of such people is that we are taking advantage of a new technique called crowdsource financing, and specifically using an internet platform called Kickstarter. And we plan to launch here within a month or two a Kickstarter project which will allow potential what we call backers, people that say, yes, I would like this in my home, to in fact contact our company and make that very small purchase, if you will, to reserve their place in this queue.
By the time this airs, that should be going, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now, are you taking this out to like women's groups and the Boy Scouts and so many, to educate them about this?
I have been doing that for 10 years.
Oh, you're
with prototypes.
And is it working?
I'll tell you what, Tom, I will put it on my blog.
Okay, very
Send
good.
me an article, I'll put it on the Ajar blog.
We literally have been doing that, Tony, for 10 years. And you could spend your entire lifetime going out to Boy Scout groups and women's groups. But the fact of the matter is you need to get very large numbers of people aware of this technology. And you need to do that today using something that our generation has a difficult time understanding, called social media, and things like Tumblr and and Twitter and Facebook, and we integrate that into the social media.
How about
and
websites?
this crowdfunding platform, as I mentioned, Kickstarter, and therefore we can get, within a month or two, we can get this out to millions of people as opposed to 100 people or 50 people.
For people who want to look for it, I will have up, by the time this airs, I'll have up on my blog, which is ajar at CECE. They can look and read articles about what's going on with this, and they can even maybe link to your Kickstarter, which should be up by then.
Are there other websites, Tom, that they can access to give them a story and give them more information about this?
Well, I think that's what we have been saying, and I think that the generational divide between, as an example, the way I answered the question and the way you asked the question, and in the way the 30-year-old interpreted the questions that we asked, would suggest that there are probably many websites, but even we don't know what all of those are yet. We have to put this together.
Does your company, USCL, does it have a website?
Yeah.
Oh, of course.
Okay, so what's your website?
Yeah, what's your website?
Well, our website is uscl.com. Right. USCL Corp, CORP.com, or Energy Site, ENERGYCITE.com. Site, like to cite a number, to be the, to be cited on information.
Let's talk. We're talking about energy, and the big thing nowadays is that we're going back to global warming. That the United States is a glut on energy. We're using energy so much, and we're diverting energy from all the other countries, and we're kind of the bad guys, quote. Are we devoting? Are we using too much energy? Well, what is the story?
Well, that is a good question, and it's a very broad, huge question. But let me try to give you a fairly short answer, if I may.
Yes.
As a physics major in college with a minor in chemistry and applied mathematics, I was taught in the early 1970s that by 1995 we would have solved energy. Period. End of discussion.
Okay.
In 1980, President Jimmy Carter signed an act called the Magnetic Fusion Engineering Act, or Magnetic Fusion Energy Engineering Act, that directed the government to spend about $30 billion over the next 15 years to bring online a new source of power. That did not happen for a number of political reasons. Now, we can talk about that on another show because it's a very large subject. But the fact of the matter is, in 2001, when we had the energy crisis here in California, needless to say, remembered the fact that I was taught that energy would be solved and we should have had something called fusion power online by 2000, and we didn't.
All have colonies on the moon by now.
Yeah, right.
No, well, that's a little more abstract. Fusion
at the time.
Fusion is not abstract. Fusion is needed. And the reason that fusion is needed is that, to speak directly to your question, the United States has roughly 4% of the world population, but yet we use roughly 28% of the energy. Some people say that means that we are a glutton, but another way to look at it is we happen to be blessed and very fortunate in that we were the developing country in the world, and we in Europe led the country.
And India are developing, they are also burning that kind of energy.
In order to live a decent standard of living, you need energy. You cannot run a 747 airplane on solar cells.
No,
you cannot run your Honda Accord on solar cells. I'm sorry. So we do, in fact, need to solve energy in the long term, and conservation in the meantime helps us get to the point. It buys us more time to solve this problem.
Individual consumers having control of their own energy usage is how you're going to get to multiple people saving pennies will lead to the state saving millions.
But as well as educating the people of the need to solve energy.
The other concern that people had about smart meters that we should probably put to bed right now is that there was some naysayers out there that tried to make a deal out of the electromagnetic fields being
and radiation.
And radiation.
I heard
radiation. I don't even know where that comes from, but where that might be a health danger from this little computer-looking device. And so that certainly is not, and maybe Tom should say a little something about that not being a concern.
Yeah, I'm not worried that if I'm on a power wire transmitter, I'm going to get cancer.
People are, though. Some people are worried. So let Tom say that. Yeah.
Well, there are two issues here. One, you mentioned electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic force.
Field.
EMF.
Yeah.
And we mentioned radio waves. So, I remember growing up in Arizona. My grandmother lived in a very small town called Mary, Arizona, and she was 75 miles in the mountains away from Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And in those days, we had something called television sets and antennas. We didn't have cable. Mm-hmm. And every time it rained and it became very cloudy, her TV would go haywire, and she used to complain. And the reason it went haywire is that the rain in the air and humidity caused all of the power lines to become excessively overloaded and generate something called corona. Mm-hmm. Right. And she used to say, "Oh my gosh, we're going to be the EMF is very dangerous, and not only that, it's affecting my television." Well, a few years
see it affecting the television. A
few years later, to make a long story short, Arizona Public Service built a very high tension series of power lines over power that she leased to power company, and all of a sudden they became her best friend. Because she spent the rest of her life living on the money Arizona Public Service paid for the right-of-way to run those power lines.
And they're quite high up.
And her sister was 102, and her other sister was 100, and she was 99, and she passed away.
So how old would she be if there wasn't any EMFs?
Right.
99. So, that's anecdotal, to be sure. But radio waves... It's nothing more than a pulsating magnetic field, and there is no correlation between radio waves and human health
or radiation.
Radiation
like
is
nuclear
different. Radiation is a little bit different because radiation is high energy particles.
And that's
what happened? What happened? No, there is no
particles.
There's no uranium inside this meter.
Nothing. No particles.
No
nuclear anything.
So what happened is that specifically PG&E and some other utilities, when they attempted to counter the anti-smart meter groups, they accidentally made the mistake of saying the amount of radiation coming from the power meter is no greater than the amount of radiation coming from your cell phone.
And when you mention radiation...
And they should have said radio waves. But when people hear radiation, they think nuclear.
I'm getting as much radiation as I'm getting out of my cup.
I have a friend in Toastmasters. She's a herbalist and so forth, and she would not use a microwave because
she says radiation.
It's changing the structure of your food, and you're going to get all kinds of diseases because it's modifying your food. And last time you explained what a microwave
that's absolutely not true. What the microwave does, it uses radio waves, and it uses the same frequency of radio waves that your cordless cell phone runs on, which is 902 megahertz or 2.4 gigahertz. And the radio waves, if you confine them to a very, very small cubic area, like inside a metal box. And it's intense, and it's pinpointed, and it's very, very high power. The only thing it does, it actually causes the hydrogen atoms of the water molecules. Remember, water is hydrogen and oxygen. It causes those hydrogen atoms to resonate and vibrate. And when they vibrate fast enough, it generates something called heat. Okay? So that's the extent. That's why a MANA radar range in the 60s, it says it heats the food within, but it only heats stuff with water, with hydrogen molecules in it, because it causes those molecules to vibrate and generate internal heat.
So if I put
it does not change the organic composition of the food, of the chemicals in the food.
If there's no liquids, it won't be.
No.
Oh, she's really adamant about that. She said, I will never own a microwave because it's...
Good. That's
I
her
said,
choice.
okay.
That's her choice. You're not going
Yes.
to change her mind at that.
No. Well, we're coming up to our end of our hour show, and I'll tell you, we could go another 2 hours, and I got so many questions, especially about global warming and the truth, and
Global warming is something we need to address because we could spend we could be far more productive if we would solve energy, because when we solve energy correctly, we take global warming off the table for discussion.
Well, the interesting thing is they're saying that as the ice melts up in Antarctica, our seawater is going to rise.
Arctica or Antarctica?
Antarctica.
Yeah, I think you mean Arctica. The North
Arctica?
Pole. Yes, because it floats in the Arctic. The
Yeah,
North
yeah.
Pole, it's all
The other
floating.
one has land.
Right.
Yeah.
Antarctica's land.
Right.
I think a guy named Archimedes answered that a few
Right, with a glass of water and ice.
Well, actually, he was in a bathtub, and he
Yeah.
jumped out of the bathtub and yelled, "Eureka, I discovered displacement." But the bottom line is, as the ice melts, the water does not rise.
Yeah, if you put an ice cube in there, it's not, as it melts, the water's not going to
Exactly.
go up.
Exactly.
But where are they getting all this data from that's saying, oh my God, the glaciers are melting and the oceans are rising? Where's that coming
I don't
from?
mean to be flippant, but I'm going to say the tabloid news organizations.
Okay. Well,
It becomes much more of a political
It's a
issue
political and a
if you
media
listen
issue.
to people than it is a scientific
well, I
issue.
think
Exactly.
the environmentalists once had to go back and live in caves. And
I
don't want to
think
live in caves.
environmentalists have a good heart and they have all good intentions, but they don't understand fundamental physics and they don't understand the solution. The solution is to correctly solve energy with a new form of energy that does not create a carbon footprint and does not create radioactive waste.
Right,
Now,
right.
that's something that we probably should talk about on the future show.
Okay, well, I'm going to have you two back. This is so much fun. Because my friends that are a little on the left, it's hard arguing with them because they're accusing me of killing all the animals and the whales and the seals and...
In truth, science is not left or right. Science is...
Right, it's what the data that really is there.
Right. Science is data and interpretation of data, and really our interpretation will and should always evolve as we gather new information.
Yep.
So
Human knowledge doubles every 10 years.
Yeah.
yeah, what we feel is true right now could be laughable in 20 years, you know?
Well, last question. Will this work in apartments? Because I
Yes.
would love to get one.
Yes, it will, and that's a good point, because in an apartment complex, you may have a meter for 50
Yeah,
apartments.
right.
And understand that each meter has a unique digital address, just like each computer has
Right.
an IP address, which is sorted out at your ISP.
Right.
Each display is paired with its owner's meter, so your display cannot inadvertently give you the information from your
So
next door neighbor's
Where
meter.
can I buy one? Who can I contact to say I would like to volunteer to be?
You go to www.usclcorp.
I will put it on the credits.
Call me at 482-2000.
Okay, I'll put it. Well,
916.
916.
482-2000.
Tom, thank you. Cheryl,
Well, thank you for
two
the
are
opportunity.
so much knowledge, and it's refreshing to hear some real truth, not things that people pull out of the air and make up, which I think that's a lot of they're trying to teach in universities and colleges. They're trying to teach that we are the bad guys and we're using all the energy and we need to stop. And well, like I said, I don't want to go back living in caves, or I don't want to go back and growing my own food. I don't want to do
Okay.
that.
I, for one, really appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk to you,
Well,
Tony.
thank
so thank
you.
you.
Of
Thank
course,
you for
and I do
inviting me.
look forward to a second show.
Yes, you will.
And I think it's very important to note that fossil fuels, meaning oil and coal, are finite, and we do need to solve energy by getting off fossil fuels.
Well, let's end by how long are we finite on oil?
That's a function of how many nations are developing as quickly as they are.
Right.
And in fact, I think most people would be shocked to know how severe the problem is in the short time frame. And it really is deserving of another discussion on another show.
Yeah, I will have
But
you.
by 2050, we need to solve the problem, or we will be forced to be living in collective farms like Cuba, or we will be forced into a Malthusian situation of population reduction, which we really don't want.
No, we don't. Well, thank you both. You two are extremely interesting, and again, like I said, it's refreshing to hear some logical thinking, because if you watch TV and the news, you get a lot of illogical thinking. So, ladies and gentlemen, listen, I'm going to have them back, and we're going to talk about global warming, oil,